The latest move of the Ukrainian army has destroyed all Putin's plans. The Ukrainian army has carried the superiority it has achieved on land and in the air to the sea area as well. Enraged by these developments, Putin has taken action to launch a new offensive on Ukrainian territory through the port of Odessa. But with the tremendous move of the Ukrainian intelligence service, the Russian Navy received one of the biggest defeats in its history. The Ukrainian army, which caused a nightmare to the Russian cruisers with the HIMARS missiles sent by the United States, rewrote the fate of the war. This latest mistake of Putin's was the last straw for the Russian Navy, and the step taken by the rebel Russian generals in the Black Sea has literally cornered Putin. In the last period of the war, in the face of the pressure of the Ukrainian army, the occupying Russian forces began to suffer heavy defeats in a row. The Ukrainian army, which has further increased its strength with the support of numerous world states, especially the United States and other Western countries, has managed to turn the balances in the war in its favor, thanks to its superiority in air operations and ground operations. Aiming to demonstrate this advantage in the sea area, the Ukrainian army made inspection trips off the Black Sea. Putin, whose plans for domination over Ukrainian territory have already begun to completely deteriorate, was very uncomfortable with Ukraine's moves towards the sea area. After that, Putin held an emergency meeting at the Kremlin Palace and based all his offensive plans on a landing to be carried out through the port of Odessa. In this way, Putin, who wanted to ensure both dominance on the territory of Ukraine as soon as possible and to deal a very heavy blow to the Ukrainian naval forces, was extremely confident that this operation would bring success. But the facts were not at all what Putin expected. An information that fell into the hands of Ukrainian intelligence was of a nature that would change everything. A large number of warships belonging to the Russian Navy were located in the port of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula, under the influence of Ukraine's recent cross-border operations. Russian cruisers, which have been waiting in the region for a long time by the order of Putin, who has started to lose his authority that he has not been able to provide for many years in Crimea, took action when they heard that an attack was going to be carried out on the port of Odessa. At this time, the Russian Navy, which also added 3 landing ships, began to move towards the Odessa coast. Just at this time, the U.S. intelligence service, as soon as it noticed the movement in the Black Sea, reported the situation to the Ukrainian authorities. After that, Ukrainian intelligence service units, which immediately intensified their work on the region, found that a large Russian navy had taken off from the port of Sevastopol and was approaching Odessa at top speed. The Ukrainian commanders decided to put forward their secret weapons without wasting any time on this intelligence. And the Ukrainian forces, which have lined up the HIMARS missile systems, included in the latest support packages sent by the United States to the Odessa coastline on the one hand, have begun to evacuate citizens residing in the port area. Along with the dispatch of local residents to safe areas, the Ukrainian Special Forces units set up ambushes on the roofs of abandoned buildings. Having completed their preparations within a few hours, the Ukrainian soldiers began to wait for the Russian Navy, and very soon, the expected news from the Ukrainian scout troops arrived. The Russian Navy, unaware of everything, docked at the port of Odessa. Since there was no threat against them, the Russian cruisers, who wanted to attack immediately, dropped anchor and began firing consecutive shots into the port. But the Ukrainian army waited patiently for the Russian soldiers to set foot on land. The Russian landing ships, who were thoroughly convinced that the region was completely defenseless, approached the port thoroughly. The Russian infantry, who abandoned their ships one after the other, began to advance to take full control of the port. But when the Russian soldiers realized their mistake, it was too late for everything. The Ukrainian army launched the attack when it became certain that the Russian soldiers would not be able to return to their ships. And 4 HIMARS missiles fired back-to-back fired accurate shots at Russian ships within seconds. Russian soldiers on the ground are literally cornered by this unexpected move by Ukraine. At this time, the Russian cruisers, who could not make any intervention due to the landing ships in front of them, tried to change course to retreat. However, in the face of the endless HIMARS shots of the Ukrainian army, the Russian cruiser located at the closest point to the port received very heavy damage. The missile, which hit the engine section of the ship, caused the deck to surrender to flames within seconds. The Russian warship, which began to sink into the depths of the Black Sea with successive explosions, disappeared from sight within minutes. At this time, clashes broke out between Ukrainian Special Forces troops stationed on the roofs of abandoned buildings and Russian soldiers decamped to the port of Odessa. About 50 Russian soldiers surrendered to Ukrainian forces in the conflict, in which a large number of Russian soldiers were neutralized in a short time. Putin's dreams, all his plans for the port of Odessa, where the Russian Navy was quickly withdrawn, were disrupted, crashed to the bottom of the Black Sea. This latest move by the Ukrainian army has escalated tensions between the Russian military and the Kremlin to an irrepressible level. For the Russian Navy, which is already quite angry at Putin's back-to-back mistakes, Putin's failed plan in Odessa was the last straw. The Russian Navy, which is facing the biggest crisis in its history due to Putin's irrational decisions, has caused a huge panic in the Kremlin with the declaration they have issued. The article in the content of the declaration that all generals now serving in the Russian Navy will indefinitely decouple operations has turned Putin mad with anger. Putin, whose authority was destroyed in the face of the statements of the Russian generals who stated that they would use full initiative to prevent the disaster in Odessa from happening again, stated that from now on no warship could even move unless it was approved by the Kremlin. The response of the Russian Navy to these bans has been very severe, and the Russian generals who brought 2 Russian warships to the Black Sea have demanded that the Kremlin withdraw the latest decision. On top of that, everything got even more complicated when Russian General Staff Chief Valery Gerasimov said that heavy sanctions would be imposed if the Russian cruiser, which was in the Black Sea without permission, did not return. The Russian crew, who had obeyed Putin unconditionally until this time, were surprised by what they suffered when they learned that they would be tried for treason, and the ship's personnel, determined not to disregard their lives for Putin's interests for even one more minute, decided to cross to the Ukrainian side together with the 2 Russian warships they were using. With these developments, which have caused great repercussions all over the world, Putin has paid the price for his impulsive decisions very heavily. Putin, who delivered 2 warships that are very critical for both naval forces to Ukraine with his own hands, and caused very critical intelligence for the war to fall into the hands of the Ukrainian army, turned all the balances against himself with this mistake. Putin, who was forced to largely stop land and air operations due to the mind-bogglingly successful moves of the Ukrainian army during the last period of the war, has now begun to end the dominance project that he has been aiming to establish in the Black Sea for many years. According to the common comments of many war analysts, with Putin losing his authority at sea, it seems possible that much more critical steps for the independence of Crimea will be taken soon. The Ukrainian army, which has become a much more modern force thanks to the intelligence and support packages provided by the United States and other Western countries, has made many moves since the beginning of the war to end the unjust Russian annexation of Crimea. In addition, the invariable item put forward by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for possible peace negotiations with Russia was the independence of Crimea. The Crimean people, tired of the persecution of Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the assimilation project since 2014, managed to deal very heavy blows to the occupying Russian forces in Crimea with the resistance organizations they formed during this process. Putin, who wants to make Crimea the rallying point for ammunition and troop shipments to be sent to Russian headquarters on Ukrainian territory, has largely lost the chance to make moves in the region with sabotage actions by insurgent organizations and sabotage actions by the Ukrainian army, which have increased even more recently. Now it seems only a matter of time before the Ukrainian army, which has completely turned the balance in the Black Sea in its favor, will launch an operation that will completely repel the Russian forces in Crimea in the near future.